G'day, man. 40 here, going out live right now across Rumble, across YouTube, across Twitter, Facebook, and Odyssey. So, Kanye West is apparently married an Australian. So, Bianca Sensori, an architect who was working for him. And I hear a lot of chatter that she's Jewish, but I can't find any evidence that she's Jewish. Bianca Sensori, right? That's not a typical Jewish name. Let's go to the Kino Casino.
Group to me still because I don't want to be enemies with Nick. I actually respect Nick. But what I'm saying is Nick doesn't respect these guys. Nick doesn't respect like Nick acts like he loves. I mean, I just don't think that. Why isn't he at their events? Why isn't? I mean, I guess I saw Nick tweeting about maybe he respects him. I don't know, but they're all like Bake's a felon, going to jail for multiple charges. Ethan's a felon, like with his Memphis micro penis. Like these are and this is like I said, I like Nick, but Cozy, the whole Cozy bunch is a bunch of freaking losers with like binge porn and they're all federal informants that are all coming out of the pen. So I mean, literally the biggest streamer on there is Ethan Ralph besides Nick, and he is a ex-con that is America first by living in Mexico. So I mean, go figure. That's how America.
I just don't
first.
get. But why doesn't Nick just throw these bums off? Like, why doesn't he get rid of them and promote like Vincent James?
Yeah.
See, there's younger people.
Exactly.
Yeah, see, and that's why I'm like, Nick is smart enough to realize this. Like you guys, because like people can make fun of Nick all they want. I get it, but Nick is smart. I'm saying he is, and he's like kind of, has his finger on the pulse of what's going on. But I just think Cozy's so desperate. That's why he has to put up people like Ethan because he does have an audience. So I think it's almost like a necessary evil.
Yeah,
I don't think.
I think he's now between a rock and a hard place where it's like he's basically he has these guys who are fucking like retards, like running his site now basically, and he's pushed away all the serious people who could actually help the movement of America first. Right now, I was telling Ashton, it's become Ralph's like website. Nick is paying $30,000 a month.
Yes.
For Ralph and Beardson and Baked, yeah, and Baked Alaska.
What do you think about Baked fucking only getting 60 days? 60 days.
Yeah, shit. But you know what? I mean, I like that was mad at me. Oh, you're making better than January 6th winner. I don't think he should have got any days, but I think he should have got 30 for basing that bouncer. But listen, I don't even care. He's in 60 days, so probably come out like it only give him more clout in a weird way. Like you kind of benefit from that. It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't think that'd be the case, but I'm saying he's going to come out like a hero to a bunch of autistic people. So it is what it is. He's going to get. I know it is, guys. Seriously, they're going to be like, oh, this guy did more than any veteran. They're going to give him all this clout respect. So it's stupid. It is what it is, but I just think that's the case. So, but listen, when it comes to Baked Alaska, it comes to Ethan, that they're all lifted up by Nick. So you guys can make fun of Nick, but like those guys wouldn't even exist. They wouldn't even have a platform to stream on. Was for Nick. So he's the one that has out of any of those people. So that's what I'm saying. So that's why I'm a defending there.
What do you think of Nick though? He's like stopped streaming. He's sort of like, I guess, not in hiding, but like, I think he's just depressed. I think he's like now looking at what's happening. Kanye now married a Jewish woman, so obviously that just fucking threw all his shit under the bus,
and I would have said this, to Nick, but he probably didn't want to hear it. There's no way. There's a saying, it's like never meet your heroes. There's no way you're going to meet, even though Kanye's all night, that's almost worse. That's like you're in the honeymoon state, and then you get all this goodness, and then it gets taken away from you, and you feel it's depressing, it's demoralizing. So there's just no way that it was going to end well. And that's the other thing is like Nick and them and Ali Alexander, they're so smart, but they know Kanye West has a 0% chance to become president of the United States. So for them to say that, I mean, they might call me out and say Donald Trump had a 0% chance. It's just different. It's just different with Kanye.
Oh yeah, no, it's night and day. It's a night and day difference. I really think he married this Jewish woman, and now he's gonna like separate from Nick. There's no way he's gonna continue with Nick.
He's gonna go back to his old life and say, "I had a mental breakdown. I was mentally ill. Please let me have my billions of dollars back, please."
For the love of God.
He's gonna have a come to Jesus meeting, but dude. This marriage is probably all fake. Like, he's doing it to like get Matt back at Kim Kardashian or something. This just shows you how screwed up Kanye West is. He's just randomly getting married. I mean,
I actually heard
nobody would recommend to get married after 2 months. Sorry, Worski.
No, I was just saying,
No.
When you brought it up, apparently there is no marriage certificate. Is that true?
Yeah, it's probably all fake. Everything's fake. Like, dude, him and Kim Kardashian are married forever, but she had babies through surrogate. They lived in separate houses. Like, these Hollywood marriages are all fake. Like, maybe they bang a couple times. They're all set up by their agents. Like, I'm obviously a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, but I just don't even think Kanye West is even banging that girl. I mean, maybe he is a little bit, but I don't know. It seems all kind of gay to me in a weird way.
She looks just like Kim Kardashian. She's like a fucking clone of Kim K. Have you seen this woman?
Yes, and the last girl he dated was a Kim K clone. So he's got this like thing that I think he does it to piss off Kim. I don't think it's like I don't think he actually is anti-Semitic. I just think he thinks Pete Davidson is Jewish, so that's why he doesn't like Jewish people. Like,
exactly. Well, no. Have you heard the transcript of where he's saying to his friend? He's like, "I've got a white Jewish boy with a 9-inch penis fucking my girl.
Yeah,
what do I do? Right. And what? Like, help me." And you won't help me? There's a 9-inch monster dick Jewish man banging my girl, and you won't help me? What do I do? It's like a fucking nightmare.
Oh, man.
Well, but this is...
I remember I had this girlfriend, and she said, I like it that you're not too big, because then we can do more positions. It's like, great, thanks, sweetheart. I mean, this crazy modern thing where when you go to bed with someone, she's had 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 lovers before you, and she'll probably have, that many lovers after you. And so one of the few reliable predictors of how long a marriage will last is the number of sex partners that the woman has had. That's why overwhelmingly, I don't think men make women better by going to bed with them and giving them an injection, a penis, right? Ideally, your future wife has had 0 previous lovers. She's had under 5, you're in pretty good shape. But if she's had more than 10, in all likelihood, your marriage is going to end in divorce. And I don't know why that's so predictive, but it's the one statistic that seems to have very high explanatory power. Okay, Nathan Cofnas has a good tweet here responding to Kevin McDonald. And Nathan Cofnas says, "Left, here's a screenshot of my website. I link to every reply you wrote in this exchange, including a pre-retracted version of your Philosophia paper. Right, screenshot of your website. You link only to your own writing. Yet you accuse me of cleverly preventing people from reading your paper." So looking at Jonathan Otto Pohl, he is tweeting with regard to Nathan Cofnas. He says that Cofnas has just got it all wrong. And so let me read to you from the Otto Pohl tweet. "Since the HBD TARD, so human biodiversity TARD, Cofnas is again trending, here's my rebuttal of his claim that all Jewish overrepresentation everywhere is solely the result of hierarchy and geography, never had anything to do with ethnic networking and in-group preference." Well, nowhere does Cofnas say that Jewish overrepresentation everywhere is solely the result of high IQ and geography. So let's get back to the Cofnas paper. So Kevin McDonald would argue that Jewish intellectuals promote liberalism to undermine Gentile societies and to advance the evolutionary interests of Jews. Kevin McDonald says that Jews were a necessary condition for the triumph of the intellectual left, late 20th century Western societies. Empirically, we can see that's false because many societies, such as Sweden, with a very tiny percentage of Jews, right, are even more to the left than the United States, Australia, and England. So Cofnas proposed the default hypothesis to explain Jewish overrepresentation in the leadership of liberal intellectual movements. Jews are overrepresented primarily because of high average IQ, secondarily because of their concentration in influential urban areas allows them to capitalize on their abilities. So you can have more cultural and political influence if you live in a big city, as opposed to when you're in an isolated country part. So despite being about 0.1% of the world population, Jews have been 44% of world chess champions, 25% of Fields medalists in mathematics, 24% of the winners of Japan's Kyoto Prize, 26% of Nobel laureates in physics, 26% in physiology, medicine, 39% in economics, 19% in chemistry, 14% in literature. So many of the most prominent figures in art, business, politics are Jewish. Jews are frequently the leaders of movements with radically opposing aims such as libertarianism and socialism. The default hypothesis says that Jews are overrepresented for the same reasons they are overrepresented in liberal movements as for other intellectual activities. And Cofnas explicitly states that Jewish IQ, which is supposedly Ashkenazi IQ averages around 110, is not enough to explain Jewish achievement. Besides a geographic advantage, personality traits play a role in Jewish success. So there are more and less effective personality traits. If you're more extroverted than introverted, that will make for more success in the world. If you are conscientious as opposed to sloppy, you will have more success in the world. If you're low in neuroticism as opposed to high in neuroticism, you'll have more success in the world. If you're above average in openness, you'll have more success in the world. What's the other one? Oh, and if you're at least average or above in agreeableness, generally speaking, you'll have more success in the world. So there are certain personality types that predispose one to success. And stereotypes do tend to have a basis in reality. Jews have been consistently stereotyped as having distinctive personalities, for example, being shrewd. So default hypothesis is not a unified theory of sociology, right? Jewish success is not purely explained by IQ and geography. So Cofnas makes that pretty clear in this paper. So I'm not sure where Jonathan Pohl gets the idea that Cofnas claims that the default hypothesis is the sole reason for Jewish success. Okay, here's an example of Peter Zeihan getting it really, really wrong.
Go. What caused all this to be so poorly managed?
Well, Russia has always been poorly managed and authoritarian. But under Putin, it's taken a much darker turn because of the nature of the end of the Cold War. If you remember back to 1982, there was a coup in the Soviet Union. And Chernomyrdin and Andropov and Gorbachev were FSB, well, then KGB agents who basically overthrew the old system of Brezhnev and took over and because they were the only ones who really had a full understanding of what was going on. They controlled the information. They were not able to save the system, and so it broke.
Stop. Now, this is not hyperbole, but this is a kind of distance from historical concreteness.
Yeah, so Peter Zeihan is very glib speaker, charismatic, glib, enthralling, compelling speaker, but he often gets facts wrong, sometimes important facts wrong, such as here.
That's really worth bringing out. I'm going to give Zeihan a pass here on Chernomyrdin. Chernomyrdin was certainly in politics at the time, but he was young. He wasn't even a minister of the gas industry yet, I don't think. He was about to get that position toward the middle of the 80s. And Chernomyrdin was later prime minister of Russia and I believe Russian ambassador to Ukraine. Peter gets a pass because he really means Chernenko, not Chernomyrdin, and it's a slip of the tongue, and we've got to be clear about that. But Chernenko and Gorbachev were KGB agents. Really? For real? Andropov was head of the KGB. And there was a coup. What kind of coup was there, Peter? Maybe Peter has a legitimate answer, but Brezhnev died. He wasn't overthrown. And there were then significant changes, of course, of various kinds of interesting stories there. Andropov and Gorbachev had a kind of unlikely relationship. Andropov met Gorby in the late 60s, and they had challenges and disagreements, but he had an eye on Gorbachev, or a positive kind of eye. Meanwhile, Gorbachev was exasperated by Andropov's incapacity to analyze the situation as it really was. But what Peter's coming out with here is something that an historian or a political analyst of an academic kind really wouldn't say, because this is a cartoonification that is really worth noting. Let's go on.
And Putin is the...
Yeah, so I really enjoy Peter Zeihan, but that is a great description of what he does. It's a cartoon version of reality.
Successor to that legacy, because he was...
And so sometimes a cartoon version is, relatively accurate, and sometimes it is far from accurate.
Also in the KGB. And we're now in an environment that between the terminal demographic structure of the Soviet/Russian system and Putin's personal paranoia, so he's gone through and purged what was left of the KGB, FSB, of anyone who has personal ambitions to succeed him. We're left with an entire political elite of only about 130 people. And Putin has removed anyone who has leadership ambitions.
Oh, geez.
Now, they all see the world the same way. They all kind of agree with Putin on what's at stake here.
They all agree with what's at stake. That's unclear. I mean, how many people in Putin's Security Council would have started a full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Between 0 and less than a handful, perhaps? But where Peter is right is that Putin's actually marvelous at picking people. He's very good at picking people. But he only picks people who are profoundly corrupt and profoundly loyal, right? Which restricts the field. And to that extent, Peter is right. But then Peter goes on to say something that is, again, hyperbolic, that there are 130 people in this sort of elite, and that Sechin is the only one out of them who could ever do a revolution or a coup against Putin. But that if he did a coup against Putin, Peter says, then the rest of that elite would stop him or punish him afterwards, get rid of him afterwards. Now, that could be an okay sort of use of hyperbole, but of course, if you took that literally, that's just a...
Yeah, so Peter Zeihan, like many very popular pundits and commentators and live stream personalities, presents a hyperbolic, cartoonish version of reality, which is a lot of fun to listen to, but you also want to get a lot of other sources. All right, he's not like a Russia expert, and he'll admit this. He isn't a particularist. All right, he has a generalist kind of knowledge. Okay, a lot of good stuff on Steve Saylor's website. So I noticed after 2014, the Ferguson effect, the initial Ferguson effect, all sorts of my friends started going out and buying a lot more guns, qualifying for concealed weapons permits, getting security guard training so that they could then be part of a security team and legally carry guns. And you now find stores in Los Angeles with a whole bunch of more armed guards. And Steve Saylor makes this point: a depoliced Los Angeles is an armed Los Angeles. So you go to all sorts of stores in downtown Los Angeles, you'll see all these armed guards, armed uniformed guards, as well as more people carrying concealed weapons with or without permits. So the depolicing, Black Lives Matter people dreamed they would have a society where crime would go down because police somehow cause crime. But what they're creating is a society where everyone's armed, where neighborhood WhatsApp groups become essential for security, and even Ross stores in downtown have armed guards and an entrance procedure. So whatever it is that the Black Lives Matter crowd wants to achieve, the reality is going to be a lot more like modern day Lebanon rather than old days Sweden. So we'll basically go back to sundown towns where people don't go out after dark, and lots of private members only events, private member shopping. So we will become more and more like South Africa if this depolicing trend continues. Okay, true diversity, says Steve Saylor, will not be achieved until we can guess which content is a world star hip hop worthy video. So, like, where the heck is this happening? Okay, so did that occur in Amsterdam, Atlanta, Adelaide? Well, it's Beveren, Belgium, suburb of Antwerp near the Dutch border. And there's a news report, bystanders film how girls get into a fight on Grokmarkt. Local police start investigating. Well, they don't just film how the girls got into a fight, they film the fight. So the more diverse the society, less likely you are to have people who will step in and try to stop these fights. If you got some kind of fight going on between members of an out group, all right, you're not very likely to want to step in and get yourself hurt. Why would you risk getting hurt for someone who's not a member of your in-group? And so when there's one dominant in-group, you feel like society is your in-group, like the entire nation state is your in-group. But when you stop having one dominant group, then people become less and less inclined to step in and try to prevent fighting. So people just step back, and now with the depolicing movement, police have less and less incentive to step in. So yeah, people will stand around and watch. Why would they want to get involved when you have various outgroups who are going to war? Okay, professor of economics with great jobs try to take down a web forum for unemployed graduate students. So most academic disciplines, this Steve Saylor writing, have an extremely unofficial job market rumors forum for anonymous, disgruntled, unemployed PhDs and grad students to discuss where they can get a job, along with topics of related interest, such as the shortcoming of professors with jobs. So these websites for the underemployed tend to be dominated by the concerns of the least privileged groups in today's academic hiring environment, such as white men. So topics such as affirmative action, which the media treats as sacred, right, are often rudely discussed. So the economics job market rumors discussion board is particularly disrespectful towards their betters, since economics requires math skills and attracts less politically correct academics. So most economists are still on the left, but the ratio is about 2-to-1 rather than 20-to-1, as in other social sciences. So powerful economists, especially ones who benefited from affirmative action, very much want to shut down this forum. And they blame this forum for stopping the rise of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, her nomination to a powerful place in the Federal Reserve, right? So she was confirmed by the Senate in May in the face of a united Republican campaign against her. She's the new governor of the Federal Reserve Board, despite her only well-known paper on black patent holders of a century ago is an absolute confused fiasco. So she was nominated by Joe Biden as part of the Biden administration's campaign to nominate black women, rates disproportionate to their share of the population, much less with regard to their share of qualifications. Just like he picked Kamala Harris for no other reason that she was black and a woman. Okay, let me play a little bit more here from Vlad's analysis of Peter Zeihan.
So it's inappropriate to epistemically elevate somebody who said the war would happen over somebody who thought it might not, without getting into further detail. Go.
This is among the worst farmland in the world. And so they've never been able to generate enough income to have a road network. Everything has to be moved by rail. And their frontiers are just huge and they're open. And if you've got a force that can't maneuver itself, your only reasonable defense strategy is to be forward positioned and use geography to help you out. So you expand until you reach mountains or oceans or deserts, and then you anchor on either side of those and plug the access points.
And stop. So as you listen, right, and I'm listening with you, don't think, is this guy getting this right? Is this guy getting it wrong? Because think of what the underlying ideology is in pub speak, in more sophisticated speak, the sort of evaluatively laden content underneath what Peter is saying. Are there some international relations theory assumptions there about how the causation of state actions is supposed to work, right? What are these assumptions? Might they not be wonky? How are they structuring what's being said? Okay, go.
Unfortunately for Ukraine, there are two of those access points on the other side of Ukraine. So the Russians were always going to try to push through and retake that territory that they had controlled for most of the last 350 years.
And stop. Substantive flag here, but we'll return. Go.
Unfortunately for them, in the 35 years since the Soviet system collapsed, the Ukrainians have developed an identity. And now they would like to be something other than a road bump.
So one of the narratives that was going around was that the reason why Russia was pushing into Ukraine is because NATO was moving their arms closer to the border of Russia.
There is something to be said for that. You just have to put it into context to really understand it. So the Russian point of view is for us to be secure, we need to expand until we reach a point where invaders cannot overwhelm us. We have to be able to plug those access points. But to give the Russians what they want, you have to sign over the future of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Finland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Belarus.
So many
Ukraine.
countries Joe must think is smoking
let's
something.
go on. Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, all the stands. Basically, the Russians, in order to feel safe, they have to be able to occupy total populations that are twice of their own. And I'm sorry, but that's just not feasible. So, technically, the people who claim that NATO provoked this are correct. NATO can't have what it wants in Russia in order for Russia to feel safe. But for Russia to feel safe, they've got to occupy over 180 million people.
Stop.
And that was never part of the game.
A substantive flag for now, and we're going to carry on. And I think Peter's going to make a couple of points now. Go.
Number one, the Russians are relatively casualty immune. They fight in an area where they fight with numbers. They've never been technologically advanced versus their peers. They've always just thrown bodies at it.
And
so there has never been a conflict in Russian history where they have backed out without first losing 500,000 men.
This is fair. Insofar as we can put a number on it, this is always going to be a facetious enterprise to go that way. But I'm comfortable to say that Putin's capacity for more casualties on the Russian side is far from exhausted, and the sort of ballpark Peter is talking about here, 500,000 is reasonable.
Piece two, the Russians see this as an existential fight for their survival. They feel if they don't get those blocking positions, they're doomed, and they're probably right. But we now know that the Russians are fighting so badly. They're doing much worse than the Iraqis did in 1992.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If we had a direct fight now...
Okay, who was right on COVID? Here's an interesting short video by John Stossel.
Stay at home. That is the order tonight.
Stay home.
When COVID hit, experts were quick to tell us exactly what to do.
Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands.
Turns out washing our hands doesn't protect us, but being outdoors does. At the beginning of the pandemic, experts told us, stay home.
Yeah, so often people who are outside for a walk, or people outside at the beach, like people swimming or kayaking or boating way offshore, would get arrested, would get fined, would get sent home, when being outside is the healthiest place for you in an influenza pandemic. So there was, quite a lot of bad advice from public health authorities telling people to stay home, when generally speaking, being outside, particularly if you're not close to other people, is much healthier for you.
Close schools. Don't wear masks. Do wear masks. Disinfect countertops.
How to clean and disinfect your home.
Now, 3 years later, we can say who was right and who was wrong.
In Florida, the pandemic is raging.
The media got a lot wrong. They repeatedly trashed Florida's governor for lifting lockdowns.
Governor DeSantis is just acting irresponsibly.
While praising New York's governor.
Governor Cuomo is doing an amazing job.
I'm wowed by what you did.
The governor's brother gushed over New York's lockdowns and sneered at Florida's reopening.
That's why states like Florida are in such dire straits.
But Florida wasn't in dire straits. Florida and New York had about the same number of deaths. And if you take...
Okay, that doesn't mean that their policies were equally effective, right? So warmer climate may play a role. We don't really know. There's a lot we still don't really know. New York, I would assume, is denser than Florida. So just because two geographic locations have the same number of deaths, right? You need to see relative deaths. You need to know the relative age of the population. You need to know a lot more factors. So just because you have, say, different or the same number of deaths doesn't mean that policies were clearly right. For example, Australia did much better with the Spanish flu in 1918, did much better vis-a-vis COVID in 2020. And so our relative geographic isolation, the relatively less crowding in Australia may play a significant role here. So you just can't conclude that public health policies were better or worse just simply taking one statistic such as the number of deaths or even per capita deaths.
Take age into account. Florida has more old people. Florida did better than New York. In general, 3 years later, we see little difference between states that opened up and those that didn't. In fact,
So he's talking as though that's the only variable, right? We don't know what predisposes one to, say, severe COVID infection. There's a lot we don't know. So geography, density, weather, there are a lot of factors that come into play.
States with the fewest deaths are liberal Vermont and conservative Utah. Around the world, the experts and the media were just as wrong.
Sweden's failed experiment. How their dangerous COVID gamble went wrong.
Reporters trashed Sweden.
Officials made the decision not to lock down, hoping it would lead to widespread immunity. But cases are surging.
Cases were surging then, deaths too. But allowing people to develop immunity did pay off. Sweden ultimately did better than its neighbors. In fact, Sweden has had fewer excess deaths than most other countries, says the OECD. Did you hear about that from American media that tracked?
So I think excess deaths is probably the most accurate way to understand how a country did vis-a-vis COVID, because that way you don't have to be concerned with whether or not the country was accurately tracking COVID deaths. Just look at excess deaths.
Trashed Sweden? I didn't think so. Excess deaths, say researchers, deaths above the pre-COVID average. That's the best way to compare countries' COVID experience.
So John Stotzel's a libertarian, yet he had a thriving career on, I think, ABC News and also on Fox News. So you can get ahead, you can have success, all right, if you have dissident views. It all depends on other factors such as your personality, on whether you're willing to play by the same rules, whether you're a team player, right? Just because you have dissident political views doesn't mean that success in public life is automatically denied to you.
It's because some countries undercount COVID.
A huge gap between reported deaths and COVID deaths.
India reported fewer than 1 million deaths, but there were probably many more because there were 5 million excess deaths in India. Former Soviet countries undercounted too.
Здесь нет вирусов никаких.
The dictator of Belarus played hockey and said his country was COVID-free.
Спорт, особенно лед, холодильник этот, антивирусное лекарство, самое настоящее.
Belarus and other former Soviet states claimed they did well, but excess death data show they did terribly. Maxim Lott maps this data and posts it at the website Maximum Truth. His COVID fudge factor reveals the communist culture of hiding the truth is alive and well. Here's the excess death data for the whole world. The dark-shaded countries like Russia, Bulgaria, and Peru did worst. Countries in gray mean there wasn't enough reliable data. Lighter places like Mongolia and Kenya did very well. I was surprised to see that Kenya and Togo and Sub-Saharan Africa did well. Surprised because Africa has low vaccination rates and less high-quality medical care. Lott says it's probably because their population's so young. COVID rarely harms young people. What does the data say about countries like Australia, places that impose brutal lockdowns?
For anyone who breaches quarantine, they face fines and even jail. The penalties ranging from as much as $50,000 in WA and...
So compared to Australia's lockdowns, the United States had 0 lockdowns, right? America's lockdowns were overwhelmingly voluntary, but Australia's lockdowns were enforced by law. There were fines from $5,000 to $50,000, prison sentences, right? America had no lockdowns when lockdown is meant as Australia carried out lockdowns.
12 months behind bars.
Australia's rigid rules did save lives, partly because the island sealed its borders, banning almost all travel. For 2 years, there was little COVID in Australia. But once almost every Australian was vaccinated, the government lifted its lockdown. COVID cases soared. Population adjusted. Australia now has had more COVID cases than the U.S., but far fewer deaths, partly because when Australia stopped its lockdown, Omicron was circulating, and the Omicron strain is less deadly.
So by that measure, Australia had 1/6 the per capita death rate from COVID. Now, it's not necessarily automatically clear that this was related to government policy, though it seems likely. But there are also other factors such as population density. It's easier to shut off travel to an isolated area like Australia compared to the United States or a European country.
Were Australia's strict lockdowns worth it?
You are bending my arm backwards.
The average Australian lived 2 weeks longer because the country's strict rules limited COVID spread. But would you want to deal with Australia's authoritarian lockdown to live 2 weeks longer? I wouldn't.
So here you've got a clash of values between Australians and Americans. So for Americans, the number one value is freedom. There are different understandings of freedom, but still the number one value is freedom. In Australia, the number one value is fairness. So Australians, generally speaking, thought it was unfair if we didn't do everything we could to, limit deaths from COVID. So along with this desire to protect life, all right, you get a lot more government restriction. So you give up a lot of freedom in exchange for a reduction in deaths. And this is a consistent Australian choice. Australia's definitely to the left of America in political terms because Australians are consistently willing to sacrifice liberty in exchange for fairness.
And it turns out people in China don't want that either.
They're chanting that they don't want COVID tests. They want freedom.
Protesting's illegal in China, so these people risked their lives. Here, factory workers threw barricades at security guards in white hazmat suits. The workers have been forced to stay inside an iPhone factory for weeks to keep them safe from COVID. After the protests,
China did a U-turn and lifted most of its severe COVID rules.
What can America learn from all this? We now know that draconian lockdowns can save lives, but lockdowns hurt people financially. New York lost 400,000 jobs since the start of the pandemic. Florida gained 400,000. Also, kids in lockdown states suffered. Obesity increased in New York by 5 percentage points, just because New York kept schools closed. Well, in Florida, where schools reopened sooner, obesity actually fell a little. Kids' education suffered an historic setback.
Scores decreased by the largest amount ever recorded.
In Sweden, which never closed its primary schools, kids suffered no learning loss. I get that we know more now. 3 years ago, terrified politicians just wanted to...
So America's greatest problem right now is violent crime. And particularly in places like Chicago.
And I think it was even like his wife was like, I don't know. That would be like with Lori, like, could anyone find anyone?
Or Gavin Newsom's in-laws who moved out of state.
to Florida.
They're like, we're out of here.
And then the other thing about a place like Chicago is not only do you have this horribly corrupt city that is run by a political cartel, but then you have an entire state that's attached to it that has basically loses like all political power because of the extraordinary power that political cartel holds in.
Hey, I'm trying to run a show here. Okay, let's say hello to Colin Liddell. Colin, how are you, sir?
Hey, Luke, how are you doing these days?
Good, mate. It's been a little while, so I see you've been.
Yeah, I guess I should wish you a happy New Year.
Yes, and to you. And I see you've been very busy with Neocrat. So that website's just pumping out new content on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's going from strength to strength. Definitely, it's on the up.
But you find this new format, this new website energizing?
Not energizing, no. I just find it quite easy.
Okay. You don't get energy from publishing compelling content?
I think I get energy from eating a healthy diet.
Okay, and just out of curiosity, what constitutes a healthy diet for you?
Oh, the sushi and all that stuff, all that good stuff, tofu, all that health food that we have out here.
Yeah, I mean, Japanese tend to be healthy. They lead long lives. I mean, there are a lot of reasons to commend the Japanese diet. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think generally it's quite a good healthy diet. Of course, they do get corrupted by foreign influences as well. So there's a lot of fast food in Tokyo. So but generally speaking, the Japanese are a lot thinner, a lot leaner than Westerners. So you can fit a lot more of them into a small space.
What do you think is going on with Jason Kessler? He's headed off in a new, is it neo-Nazi direction? Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of keep tabs on people. So when they start to change direction, I've got some sort of reference points. And I do remember Jason Kessler from a few years ago. He was denouncing the neo-Nazi tendency in white nationalism, which, to some people might sound like a contradiction in terms, but I think they are distinctly different things. Being a white nationalist and being a neo-Nazi are quite different things. And, being a sort of identitarian, again, is a little bit different from being a white nationalist. I mean, so there are all these kind of interesting gradations in dissident right politics. And a few years ago, I mean, especially in the aftermath of Charlottesville, Kessler came out as a bit of a critic of some of the kind of tomfoolery that Richard Spencer got himself involved with, all that kind of neo-Nazi posturing. And he was quite severe about that. And he made several videos in which he denounced Richard Spencer for discrediting white nationalism through his Fed-like, inverted commas, neo-Nazi behavior. And that was my kind of main reference point for Kessler. I thought this is a guy who's trying to be a bit more of a sensible white nationalist, trying to avoid the kind of repugnant excesses that put off a lot of decent, normal people that you need to attract to your movement. And then in his most recent videos, he's had Christopher Cantwell on as one of his guests. And then just the other day, he dropped this video where he's using the N word and the F word and trying to kind of trash talk like, Alex Jones on acid. And it just sounded a bit of a weird change of direction. So I was just thinking, what's going on there? And I did a piece on Neocrat about that. And I also, exchanged a few tweets with Kessler himself. And he soon sort of got very defensive and then blocked me.
So some people say Fed alert with regard to Jason's new direction.
Yeah, but it doesn't really matter. The way I look at it is, either you're a Fed or you may as well be a Fed. If you're doing something to that obviously discredits a movement and makes it politically impotent and trivializes it and marginalizes it, then you may as well be a Fed. You're actually doing the sort of job that such a person would be actually getting paid to do. But the only difference is you might be doing it for free.
Yeah. Is nationalism still a strong force in Japan?
Nationalism has never been a strong force in Japan. I don't think the Japanese would consider themselves to be nationalist in the kind of overt, conscious nationalist sense that we have in the West, where nationalism kind of grows up as a kind of counterweight to other national forces. You know what I mean? So in America, you have white nationalism. This is largely because you have things like black nationalism, and so these things feed off each other. And Japan, okay, it has a growing number of foreigners, and obviously in the future, it will have some of the diversity problems of the West. But for most of its recent and for most of its history, going all the way back, in fact, but with particular emphasis on recent years, Japan has been a largely monocultural society, and the foreign groups that have come into Japan have been groups that have tended to keep quite a low profile, and who haven't kind of contested the public space and the culture in the same way that minorities in Western countries do.
Now, Japan is rearming. That seems to be a significant change, is it not?
Yeah, I think they are rearming. That's there's plenty of statistics to suggest that's the case.
And so this would require a more assertive Japan. Is it just simply a response to the growing threat of China and North Korea?
Yeah, I think they are rearming a little bit, but because the Japanese military spends quite a lot of money anyway, because Japan is, I think it's still it is the third largest economy. So a sort of couple of percentage points more on military spending is actually quite a large amount of money. And Japan already has an extremely well-equipped national defense force, and they're looking into getting all sorts of missiles that they can use to sort of dominate the sea lanes and the territory around Japan. So they are taking a kind of this is directly related to what happened in the Ukraine, of course, because a lot of people were surprised by Putin's decision to invade the Ukraine. On several levels, it doesn't really make much sense. It's a kind of irrational and unpredictable event, in other words. And so because of that, we are now living in a new world where we can't just think that people are going to act in a rational way. If Putin is prepared to act in a rather irrational way by launching this very destructive war, destructive not only for parts of the Ukraine, but also it's very, very destructive for Russia, then why wouldn't China possibly do something similar? And of course, Japan has to also worry about North Korea. So I think it's merited that, if these non-democratic countries are prepared to suddenly lunge out like that, then Japan has to sort of step up and take its defense a little bit more seriously. And also, I think it's probably a good driver for the economy.
Now, when I come to Australia, it makes certain American qualities stand out to me, such as like American optimism. So Australia and England are much more fatalistic countries than America. Are the Japanese optimistic about the future of their country? Are they pessimistic? Any particular trend?
Those sort of words seem sort of Western to me. I think the Japanese tend to be more stoical and realistic about things. Western people seem to channel things much more through their emotions, and so the Japanese tend to have a kind of drier sense of reality, I feel.
I was stunned.
Less emotional.
I was stunned when China backed off its zero COVID policy, apparently in reaction to protests. Like, one wouldn't think that protests could get China to change its policies, but China backed off on zero COVID, seemingly in response to protests. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the Chinese government, I think they were, I feel that probably they were trying to do what they thought was the best thing. And of course, being the Communist Party of China, that tended to be done in a slightly overzealous and heavy-handed manner. And so, and also this policy was not really working that well. I mean, at first, maybe it was effective, but basically it prevented the population building up a resistance. And over time, I think they started to have more and more problems. The COVID became much more infectious, and it was getting harder and harder to play this kind of mole game where you kept trying to hit the mole every time it popped up, and that policy was generally starting to fail already, I think. And on top of that, people were just sick to death of it, in addition to the policy no longer being very effective. And I think those two things combined, and the people who run China, which is Xi Jinping and his clique, they decided that this was involving them in some sort of political risk, and it was time to kind of dial it down a bit and take a couple of steps back. And so I think he's sort of gone through a bit of a change of direction himself.
And it also looks like China's backing off on its wolf warrior diplomacy. So we see several empirical points that indicate a change in direction for China. So the most famous wolf warrior diplomat has been shifted to a nothing position from a prominent position. Do you think that's significant?
Oh yeah, it's definitely significant. And again, it shows you the influence of what's happening in the Ukraine, because from the Japanese point of view, the Ukraine means that China may act in an irrational and unreasonable way. But from the Chinese point of view, it kind of means that maybe what the Russians tried was really stupid, and we shouldn't even be thinking along the same lines. And so I think the Chinese are looking at how Russia's fallen flat on its face in the Ukraine, and they're thinking, nah, we're not going to try that. If we try to do that against Taiwan, it wouldn't really be the smartest thing we could do. So I think they're learning the lesson of Russia's sort of abysmal performance in the Ukraine.
Mm. And have there been any developments in the Russia versus Ukraine conflict? Well, Russia versus NATO increasingly over the past few months that you found interesting?
Well, I think it's sort of settled into a pattern quite a while ago now. And that pattern is that the West has decided that the Ukraine will win, and they will keep supplying the Ukraine with weapons. But at the same time, they don't want the Ukraine to win too suddenly, or or for Russia to be completely humiliated. So they're sort of holding back on a lot of the things they could give the Ukrainians. And so I think there is a bit of a international consensus between Washington, Brussels, and Beijing, and also including NATO, obviously. And that consensus is that Russia is going to get beaten, but it's going to get beaten at a more gradual pace. And the reason for that, of course, would be to avoid any kind of unexpected disasters that would result from Russia militarily collapsing, because that could lead to all sorts of possibilities, with various nuclear weapons going AWOL, and the country breaking into competing fragments, and who knows what could happen from all that chaos. So I think the Chinese are maybe in some way they're kind of resolved to see Russia lose also. They kind of realize that Russia's probably going to lose this one, and the best thing they can do is to try to stop this loss being as cataclysmic as possible for Russia.
Do you have any thoughts on Andrew Tate, a male influencer arrested for sex trafficking in Romania?
Yeah, probably. I'd be curious to hear your take, though, Luke. What do you think about this whole Andrew Tate business? Because this is probably your area of expertise in a manner of speaking.
I think it is, and I also encountered this when I was reporting on the pornography industry, is that you meet a lot of repellent characters who nonetheless have kind of an animal cunning or sometimes a stunning clarity. So I find Andrew Tate repellent, but I recognize that he has a kind of charisma and cunning that can be fascinating for some people. And so I would encounter these repellent characters in the pornography industry, and they would diagnose me more succinctly and accurately than elevated PhDs in psychology. They just had an animal cunning, and Andrew Tate strikes me as someone with an animal cunning. You wouldn't necessarily want him as a neighbor. You wouldn't necessarily want him mentoring your son. But we live in a very complicated world, and so even repellent characters often have compelling insights precisely because they're willing to operate outside the bounds of what's socially acceptable. So Andrew Tate operates outside the bounds of what's socially acceptable, just like the alt-right did. And in the rise of the alt-right, you had a lot of funny, compelling, interesting, fresh commentary. And I think that Andrew Tate, in all of his repulsiveness, also had some harsh truths about life and an animal-like cunning that doesn't surprise me that thousands of people found compelling.
Yeah, but is he any? I mean, in terms of kind of content, there's nothing there that like Rush V wasn't doing several years ago.
I guess that's true. I haven't taken in enough of his content. It's just that, I mean, Andrew Tate seems to have been in a lot of fights, and I'm sure there's like a lot of like real world wisdom that you get from being in fights that not really accessible to me, to someone who hasn't experienced fights. So I don't know enough about Andrew Tate's content, but I did see this this weirdly compelling repellent character. So it was his personality that stuck out to me rather than the profundity of his thought.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's the repellent thing is obvious. It's he doesn't seem very charismatic to me, to be honest. He doesn't seem very interesting to me. He's sort of repeating or parroting manosphere talking points from like years and years ago, and maybe he's doing it slightly more efficiently or effectively in some respects, but I don't see the appeal. And maybe that's just me, but that leads me to suspect that he's been boosted in some way, and people like that become popular not because of their inherent appeal. Because I mean, look at the Luke Ford show. The Luke Ford show is probably the best show on the internet. It's the most interesting show. It has the best guests. It has the most intelligent commentary, but it doesn't do very well because it's not boosted. And Andrew Tate, I mean, I don't think I don't think Andrew Tate's live streams or his content would stand comparison with the Luke Ford show. So it doesn't make sense why that should be so popular compared to the Luke Ford show. So obviously that it stands to reason that one is being heavily boosted by all sorts of bots and weird manipulations of social media, and the other one isn't.
Thank you. I think another factor here is that Andrew Tate probably talks to an audience with an average IQ of around 95 to 100, and it's very difficult to kind of comprehend what kind of content speaks to that IQ crowd. Do you think that that's part of it?
Well, I think there's a lot of weird shit going on the internet. That's what I think. I think other countries are trying to do what they can to kind of drive polarization in Western countries, especially in America, also places like Britain, obviously. And I think when you see somebody like Andrew Tate being pushed or rising up, or all these kind of these people who hit on the fault lines in our society. I mean, like all these kind of issues of these gender issues and how you should think about women and how you should treat women or try to get a woman or control a woman. All these things are they're highly contentious, highly divisive fault lines in our modern, much more feminized society. So this to me, this looks like an attempt to basically stir the shit in Western societies.
Yeah, that's there's got to be something to that. Speaking of,
It sort of reminds me of the style. Just reminds me of Anglin in certain ways. Back in his heyday, not now, because Anglin's a sort of pale ghost of himself now.
Chuck Johnson, often referred to in the media as a right-wing troll, is an interesting character. Recently did 2 shows with Richard Spencer, and Chuck Johnson is good friends with Matt Gaetz. He introduced Matt Gaetz to his wife. Chuck Johnson's a man of like real-world accomplishments, also someone who it's impossible to take 100% seriously. Do you have any thoughts on this Chuck Johnson character?
Not too many thoughts. I mean, I know vaguely, about him and what he's done and so on, but I haven't really pinned him down. Really, I haven't really gone into what he's done or looked at his, various operations and so on. So I haven't come to a conclusion on Chuck Johnson.
Yeah, it's just kind of weird that as he's talking to Richard Spencer, he's like sharing texts that he's getting from Matt Gaetz, who's rising to prominence in the House of Representatives for the Republican Party, that he set up Matt Gaetz with his wife, and he's having these conversations with Richard Spencer, and he has a very conspiratorial perspective on Elon Musk and Donald Trump and other billionaires. So with people like Johnson, my perspective is you can't automatically dismiss them and you can't automatically accept what they're saying. You have to just be highly selective. So sometimes people will have an insight here or a piece of information, contacts that you don't have, and he can be way ahead of the news sometimes, but also so much of what he has to say is just impossible to validate. Any thoughts on your Twitter experience since Elon Musk has taken over Twitter?
Yeah, I think it's been a lot livelier. I don't feel as nervous about saying certain normal things that I used to. I mean, before Elon Musk took over, you'd actually tweet something quite normal, which most people would probably agree with, but you think, wait a minute, this might get me into trouble. And there's less of that now with Elon Musk. You think, okay, this is not actually hate speech or something weird. This is just a normal kind of witty, comment or thought, which most people can probably appreciate. So I don't have to worry about being banned for that now. I mean, so there is that sense of freedom with Elon Musk in charge, and so I think the site does look livelier. I think there's more interaction going on. So I think he's doing, from what I can tell, a quite a good job.
Is there anything about Prince Harry and his new memoir and all the media attention that he's received that you found interesting?
I haven't read the book, obviously. I just try to avoid all this royal spam. I mean, Britain and British media is full of royal spam, and this is just the latest. I mean, this is like many years ago when it was all Lady Diana this and Lady Diana that and Princess of Wales this and Princess of Wales that, and it just became so bloody tedious. And I just get sick of the royal family because of this royal spam. And so what? Prince Harry had a little argument with his brother, and people said some sort of little snidey remarks about Meghan, or maybe they didn't, or whatever. Who gives a fuck? It just bores me to death, and so I just try to avoid it as much as possible. But you've got to look at the kind of you've got to look at it in a more meta way, and it is going to cause the royal family a lot of problems. This sort of thing, it just it's just going to constantly eat away at the royal family, and remind people that the royal family are just a bunch of nobodies like everybody else.
How would you compare the, say, English, Australian, American attitudes towards the British royal family with Japanese attitudes towards the emperor and his extended family?
Well, yeah, with the British royal family, nothing is off limits. If it happens and the media see it, it'll get reported, and it'll get over-reported, and then it'll get reheated and reported again and again and again. So, but with the Japanese royal family, there's a kind of respect for the royal family. The royal family don't push themselves too much, and at the same time, the country, the media, the society, there's a certain area that's off limits, and so they don't go into that, and they don't. If they find some sort of embarrassing story came out, the Japanese media would be very circumspect about actually running with it. And there's various reasons for that. I mean, one possible reason is that there are some kind of extreme. How would you describe them? Sort of ultra nationalist, but I mean, still, I'm not comfortable using this sort of Western terminology with distinctly Japanese things. But there are these people who deeply revere the emperor. Has a kind of weird kind of cult or religion, and these people would be prepared to probably commit acts of violence if they felt the emperor was insulted in some way by the mass media. So if the British royal family, if Prince Harry was actually Prince Harihito of Japan, and he was dishonoring the royal family in this way, and being helped to do so by the Daily Yomiuri or the Asahi Shimbun, then I could predict that probably some of those journalists involved might, come to an untimely end, and maybe even Prince Harihito himself.
Now, as I understand it, Japan has very strict libel laws, so that even publishing the truth, you can get into tremendous trouble. Is Japanese news media considerably tamer than the English and American varieties?
Oh yeah, I'd say they're definitely a lot more polite when it comes to the good and the great.
Yeah, and speaking of the news media, I've noticed Ron DeSantis is just getting all sorts of positive coverage in the mainstream news media. Even lefties like Joshua Green wrote an article about him for Business Week. There was nothing but positive. So do you think that the media would really love to see Donald Trump finished as a political force in America? That's why they're currently boosting Ron DeSantis. But as soon as Ron DeSantis, say, gets a lock on the Republican nomination, they'll become a lot more savage.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable thesis. I think Trump's he's limited in what he can do politically because, obviously he has his cult following, and he can dominate the GOP, but he's very compromised with the sort of middle of the political spectrum, with the floating voters that you need to get on side, and so I think there is a lot of there's a lot of interest aligned against him for that reason. Ron DeSantis, he could be a kind of stalking horse to try to draw off some of that Trump support. But the problem with DeSantis is that he just comes across as this kind of dull, leaden, boring kind of personality. You know what I mean? So he doesn't have any of the kind of excitement or charm that somebody like Trump had. And so I think, if they could use him to sort of push Trump to the side a bit, and then so that DeSantis then became the main candidate, that would only end up with DeSantis losing anyway. So I think it's not a good sort of lookout for the Republican Party. It's not really shaping up well for them. But then having said that, when you look at the Democrat Party, that's not exactly very thrilling either. I mean, it's just like American politics is just dying a death, really, isn't it? I mean, it's just full of all these unlikable, boring characters who don't even seem to function mentally very well.
Does Japan have anything close to America's culture wars? Or to the extent that Japan has culture wars, what are they like?
Culture wars. Well, I guess the let's see. Well, there is a kind of tendency to Japan sees itself as part of the the kind of G7, and it doesn't want to be too out of step with the other G7 countries. And of course, the other G7 countries are all these kind of woke, politically correct, gay rights, feminist kind of countries. And so Japan thinks that it should probably make a few token gestures to whatever seems to be popular in the other 6 G7 countries.
Mm-hmm. And has Japan been changed by the Abe assassination?
Not really. No, not really. Not in a deep way. I don't think so. I mean, there's been a bit of focus on, the links between religious groups and politics, but that hasn't really gone anywhere important. It hasn't really led to any substantial changes. And Japan is still pretty much a kind of one-party state because nobody else can really beat the Liberal Democratic Party, and it's all down to the various groups and factions in the Liberal Democratic Party. I think Japan, probably more than countries in the other parts of the G7, they recognize the fact that politicians don't really run the country. It's not really run by the politicians. The politicians are the front men. They're there to kind of sell ideas and to try to create some sort of consensus with the voters, but they're not really the vital, important players. I mean, the real players in Japan are the permanent civil service and various kind of corporate interests, and and very, very important, this the idea that Japan should be run as a harmonious society. And that's very, very important, and that's probably even more important than the corporations. This idea of social harmony. This is the true ruler of Japanese society, in my view.
And who are the most important pundits or influencers in Japan? Do you have gurus who have millions of followers in Japan and wield significant cultural and perhaps political influence?
Probably there are people like that who have some sort of influence, but It's like I said, there's this underlying principle of unity and harmony, and whoever speaks to that will tend to do well, and whoever speaks against that or veers away from that won't do so well. So it's not really a question of personalities leading and driving the political direction. It's more of a kind of, to use one of the old, alternative right phrases. There is very much a kind of hive mind at work in Japan.
So when I listen to mainstream media sources, they all say that Ukraine is winning. When I listen to a certain type of dissident source, they all say that Russia is clearly winning. How does one distinguish who's right?
Well, you look at who takes over the ground. And in recent months, it's been the Ukraine. I think recently the Russians managed to capture a salt mine somewhere, which is kind of sort of telling in a way. And I think, this is just going to run and run. But basically, I think it's been decided that the Ukraine will win. And the manner in which this will be affected will be simply through supplying the Ukraine with better and better weapons. And the Russian weapons are basically quite rubbish, quite crap by comparison, outdated, superseded. The Russians still have a few cards up their sleeve. Obviously, they can bomb their enemy with missiles still. But that just enables the Ukrainians to get more missile defense. And if the Ukrainians were able to return the favor, that would put a different slant on things. So I just think, like I said earlier, I think the West has decided that Ukraine will win. But the only question is that they don't want, the only question is like how quickly. And the consensus, which kind of also includes the Chinese, is that nothing too drastic or sudden should happen. It should be through a kind of process of kind of grinding down the Russian military. And I think Putin has destroyed a lot of his assets out of desperation. He's kind of ripped up the social contract with the Russian people. The social contract with the Russian people was that you won't bother me with democratic impulses, and you'll allow me to just run the country, and I won't involve you in too much rubbish, like having to fight in foreign wars. And so there was a kind of social contract where Putin would get up to he would involve himself in these various international conflicts, but he wouldn't actually use the conscripted Russian military to do that. And now he's sort of broken that contract. He's actually starting to call up more and more people. He's starting to put them into these horrible training camps where the troops are very, very poorly provided with all the equipment they need, where their living conditions are abysmal, and where a lot of them are coming home dead or with limbs missing. And so I think the Russian people will at some point start to react against that. Although the Russian people do have quite a kind of slavish mentality towards their rulers. This can go on for quite some time because of the endurance for tyranny that the Russian people have.
I've been listening to a BBC Radio 4 podcast series called The New Gurus. And so you sometimes hear it talked about that we're living in an age of these new secular gurus like Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein, Jordan Peterson, and the like. Do you think we're living in an age of the new secular gurus who have millions of followers? Do you think this is a significant cultural development?
Well, I wonder about that. No, I'm not sure about that. It sounds like somebody wants to have a theme for their podcast. That's what it sounds like to me. So yeah, if you have a podcast, you've got to have a kind of bit of a strap line, something to sell it, and that sounds like a kind of good way to get a bit of attention. You know, let's call it the new gurus. And there's always been people like that. I think there's always been people ready to give freely of their advice to the rest of mankind, and sometimes they've been quite popular, and they've gained quite large followings. I don't see anything particularly new about that or particularly unique. So I think that's just a bit of a meme, really.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I heard this interesting theory of charisma, which is related to this, and that the charismatic person is someone who does the impossible or the unlikely, and then because they accomplish one thing that people are astounded by, they then get more followers, and with more followers, they get more money, resources, information that then enables them to do something else that is extraordinary, and then they build more followers, and then finally they fail, and they fall flat on their face. So think about, for example, the rise of Hitler. Initially Germany was going from success to success to success, and then finally he failed. Or Donald Trump, he came out of nowhere, took the Republican nomination, became president of the United States, and then experienced a lot of failures, and so he's no longer seen as quite so charismatic. Did you then another understanding of charisma that I like is that it's someone who gives you energy. That talking to them, listening to them, watching them, you get energized and enthused and charged up. Do you have any thoughts on the characteristics of charisma?
Yeah, that sounds kind of close to it. I think like a charismatic person who is someone on the edge. Like you mentioned with the examples you gave, Hitler and so on. Somebody who does something, who succeeds at it, and then goes on to take another risk, another gamble. And so there's always that element of somebody being on the edge, and that kind of compels our attention because it is like a kind of unwritten story. We don't know which way it's going to go, which way it's going to run, and is he going to win? Is he going to lose again? So that sort of taps into our sense of vicarious delight, and I think somebody like Richard Spencer had charisma because he was always going to do something a bit stupid, and oh my God, he's not going to try and do that, is he? Oh, he is, and that kind of that people find that entertaining and compelling, and so definitely there is something to be said for that kind of instability of the charismatic personality.
So I was listening to this podcast. Alex Kashuta was interviewing a professor of classics who uses the moniker Athenian Reactionary, and they were talking about how Netflix is now our new internal programming. That when you watch Netflix, you just you take in the Netflix perspective on the world, and Netflix becomes the new software that operates your brain, and how difficult it is to make independent decisions when we're getting bombarded by advertising and TV. And I'm highly skeptical of these claims. I don't believe that we evolved to be gullible. I believe that everyone, even the 95 IQ person, has pretty good defenses against being manipulated, imperfect defenses, but still I don't see things like Netflix or the mainstream media becoming individuals' internal operating system. What do you think about the idea? Did we evolve to be gullible?
No, I don't think that would. That's a bit of a softball question. Obviously not. People are quite suspicious by nature. Most people are quite stupid, and when you're stupid, you have to be suspicious because you don't understand what the fuck's going on. And so I think, I think people are a bit paranoid, and that's a sort of a way of sort of saving bandwidth as well. You don't have to be so bright and intelligent and know what's really going on. If you're paranoid, you can probably get some of the same good effects as a highly intelligent person who knows exactly what's going on.
At the same time, that we tend to be very good at detecting when other people are trying to manipulate us. We tend to be very bad at spotting the flaws in our own thinking, and that's why it's so important to think socially. To, for example, to do what we're doing, put our ideas out there, and then get criticism, critique, additional information. So I've been doing this type of live stream. It's alerted me to all sorts of blind spots and flaws in my own thinking. As someone, you've been thinking out loud for what, 25 years? Do you have any thoughts on the benefits and possibly the detriments of thinking out loud? Are you still there, Colin?
Yes, hi, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
I think in our case, though, we tend to get critiqued by these sociopathic incel losers who tend to follow our content. So that is a bit of a double-edged sword. But of course, they sometimes do say something pertinent and to the point, and because we're both highly intelligent, we can appreciate the good critiques from the kind of more shitposty kind of input. So I think it's important to kind of put your ideas out there, but I think it's also important to be able to critique your own ideas yourself, to be your own harshest critic.
Do you find that you're able to do that effectively as opposed to other people becoming your harshest critic?
I'm much better at critiquing my own ideas and my own thought processes and my own content than probably all of my audience, I have to say. So yeah, I mean, that might sound a little bit egotistical or arrogant, but I'm really not trying to be either of those things. But it's just a fact. I kind of know how my mental processes work, and and I also know how ideas are constructed and what can be cut out and what can be edited and what is essential and what is just dross. And so I think it's very important to cut out a lot of dross and to cut out a lot of false ideas and to really test your ideas before you put them out there. And that's why I think writing is a lot better than streaming and podcasting, and because when you just speak to people, you can just say kind of funny, witty things. You can just blow off all sorts of interesting sounding jargon and rhetoric and takes and so on. But when you put it down on the page, you're kind of forced to clinically analyze it a lot more. And so I think writing is clearly superior to the spoken word.
So our educational system, whether in Australia, England, the United States, tends to be dominated by the left, and yet most people don't emerge from it as leftists. So I don't think that having a left-wing education system is actually changing that many minds. What do you think?
Yeah, well, when I was, I guess when I went to school quite a while ago now, I thought most of the teachers were quite left-wing. It didn't really seem to work too well on me, I have to say, going by one isolated example. Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's hard to say because you need to have a lot of data. You have to look at what's going on and the attitudes of the younger generation, and I think you could make the case either way. Possibly it's easier to make the case that all these left-wing teachers with their woke agenda, with their multicultural ideas, with their feminism and their transgender, whatever, you could make the case that is actually having some impact on the younger generation. But there could be all sorts of other reasons why the younger generation is believing what it believes or accepting what it accepts. Because I think there's a lot of passivity about certain things. I mean, like transgenderism. I think most people just give up. They don't want to be involved, refuting it even. They just think, okay, there's some very intense people who seriously believe in this, and if I stand up and say the obvious thing, then I'm going to attract a lot of unnecessary bother. So I think there's a lot of passivity in the younger generation compared to my generation, which is Generation X. I think Generation X is up for a fight, but the millennials and the Zoomers, they seem to be a bit what's the word? They seem to be trying to avoid dealing with hassles. They don't like to take a stand against a lot of things. They're quite happy to just shrug their shoulders and say things like, "Okay, boomer," for example, which is just a refusal to engage. And that kind of reminds me quite a lot of the hikikomori mentality that Japan used to be famous for.
The news media and the entertainment industry are also similarly dominated by the left. What do you think affects people's political views more? The educational system, the media, news, entertainment, industrial complex, equally? What do you think?
Well, I think it's just reflecting the social trend, and I think the real social trend isn't left wing or right wing. I think those terms are redundant now. I think what we have is a less disciplined society, and when you have a less disciplined society, when a society is not prepared to use force or threats to discipline people, then you have to move towards a more kind of inclusivist and understanding kind of society. And that's more or less what we see. We see this kind of, you see this attitude to things like drug addicts. Drug addicts used to be considered criminals, and now they're increasingly regarded as people who have some kind of malady or character flaw that can possibly be remedied by showing them love and inclusion and understanding, and assigning them the correct social worker. And so that's sort of the ethos of our society. We're no longer this kind of attempt to regiment people and to use a harsh moral tone or strictures, or so this has happened during my lifetime. When I was growing up, as a kid, you were expected to do this, that, and the other, and if you didn't, you tended to get belted and so on. And in my school, when I was a student at school, there was capital punishment. I mean, I've been caned and I've been, belted on the hands and so on for various misdemeanors. And they quite a while ago, they decided to do away with things like they decided to do away with things like corporal punishment. And that's just the direction that society has moved in. And so you have to have this more kind of we can't really criticize people for being gay, we can't really say anything negative about the transgenders, we can't use old-fashioned Christian morality to shame people. And so I think that's the direction society's gone in. And I think a lot of people on the so-called polarized political tribes that also exist, they try to view that in a very kind of limited way through this left-right spectrum, and I don't think that really explains what they're seeing.
You pay much attention to sport, and if so, which ones?
Well, I was a big fan of the World Cup. I was enjoying Scotland's triumph.
Oh, they had a triumph.
Oh yeah, we finally got our hands on the World Cup.
Really?
by infiltrating. Yes, we infiltrated the Argentinian team. Didn't you notice? McAllister.
Oh, okay, didn't know.
Yeah, one of the top Argentinian players, a vital cog in the world conquering machine was McAllister. You know, so obviously he's not Argentinian with a name like McAllister.
Okay, but what about baseball? I mean, there's something very exciting going on with the English cricket team. They're scoring more runs per over than any cricket team in history.
Yeah, I've heard you occasionally talk about that, but it's just what's he talking about? What the hell's cricket? You know. No, I've got to go though, Luke.
Okay.
So you know,
Great to talk to you,
it's been
Colin.
fun. Yeah,
Blessings.
it's always fun. Okay, cheers. Bye bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye bye. Okay, let me pull up here, get a little something. This is Alex Kashuta speaking with Athenian stranger, reactionary.
Judge them, right? Now it's gotten so much worse. You actually have to go congratulate them. That's sort of the unwritten law, right? That's what they want to make into a law. That's why you have BLM people going into restaurants demanding everyone hold a fist up and say Black Lives Matter, and none of them go to jail, right? But they'll ruin your evening. But that's the problem. And that's what I wish people would understand more. That goes back to a lot of my efforts, at least on, for instance, with Twitter and elsewhere with philosophy, is when people have a more robust understanding of these things, you're able to at least name the problem. Because once you can put a face on the problem, right? Once you can name the problem, then there's a much better chance you're going to solve it. But when people don't even know how to describe the problem, right? They just sort of have that sense that something's not right. You're in a much worse off position as far as being able to solve the problem.
Yeah, that's a very profound point. And I feel like because our culture has kind of drifted into this very verbal direction, very kind of image-based verbal direction, you're kind of the burden of proof is essentially on you to verbally explain why something that you instinctively recoil from is wrong. And then, you know, with this type of stuff, it's going to be hard. And people are just they've been trained to ignore any sort of.
Doesn't it depend on what social circles you hang out in, right? Generally speaking, if you go to a normal job, you're not going to be called upon to explain your position on gay marriage or the transsexual revolution.
Impulses and say, okay, and this is some kind of atavistic bullshit, and then, you know, that's wrong to think that stuff. And, you know, like you said, you know, this movie that I saw is kind of an extreme example of this. And now at this point, you know, at the point that I can, you know, kind of safely say, okay, this is repellent. You know, I recoil from it and I don't feel bad about it. But, you know, like I said, there were phases in my life where I would have maybe known that there was something off about it, and not really, it wouldn't have been clear to me. It was just like, okay, yeah, something is wrong here. And there have been moments where I would have been, yeah, you go, girl. This is exactly what you should do. You know, this sounds great. So yeah, I think it's this absolute confusion with how things should be. So yeah, I mean.
So Alex Kashuta may indeed have essays and podcasts where she says things that are wise. She's quite pleasant to listen to, but there doesn't seem to be much content there.
You're doing God's work in that sense, because this people have thought about this for thousands of years, and they had much clearer ideas about this thousands of years ago.
Yeah, that's what's amazing is people don't realize when, for instance, you hear that phrase, live your best life. I mean, that's just it's a silly slogan, and I've never heard it used except when people are doing just really dumb things. And they, you know, like that's what they say about that Lizzo woman who's probably can't feel her feet because she's so overweight. But they're telling us that it's beautiful. She tried to lose weight. Apparently her fans and everyone attacked her for trying to lose weight. She gained it back. And now they tell her, everyone says she's living her best life, right? When she's playing a flute, supposedly a historically sacred flute, and almost naked. I mean, for all I know, she was naked. I mean, because she's so obese, it covers up whatever little she might be wearing. And they simply say that she's living her best life. No, that's not living your best life. That's someone giving a slogan to being able to live any life at all that they want. And again, we're in the realm of nihilism.
Okay, I gotta admit, I think Athenian Reactionary there has something that he's right about. All right, Laura Luma tweets, Nick Fuentes is my friend. He has a right to free speech just as much as anyone. We've become great friends over the last 5 years. We've both found common ground and formed a bond over being deplatformed and having our civil rights violated by the FBI and big tech.
And I'm just such a sucker for her. Not that we're anti-Jewish. You know, I love Jewish people, okay, like Laura Loomer. Beautiful and bold and courageous, and I'm just such a sucker for her. Not that we're anti-Jewish. You know, I love Jewish people, okay, like Laura Loomer. Beautiful.
So that was a show from Nick Fuentes a couple of days ago. Nick endorsed me when I ran for Congress. That's the Republican Jewish Committee, and AIPAC campaigned against me, even though I'm a Jewish American who's been a registered Republican my entire life. They do not use their money for what they claim, so who is my real friend? And then here is CDC Director Rochelle Walensky.
Real world data. Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real world data.
Okay, obviously, really stupid thing for her to say, and even public health officials who are generally right, that they say stupid things because they're human, and that was really stupid thing to say, and now it's not disqualifying for all, public health advice. All right, what's going on with our energy?
Because I'm seeing all these reports of all these crazy storms. It's hard to tell if our winter is warm or cold, but it is the case that natural gas prices here in the United States have come down. And that does have, in part, to do with the weather. Is that a lot of the natural gas that the United States is pumping in Louisiana and Texas is going right into export terminals because the United States does not have a pipeline infrastructure to get its natural gas, say, from Texas to the East Coast. So in the East Coast, you're right, the weather matters more for natural gas prices than what they're pumping out in Texas. There's a lot of infrastructure problems that still have to get solved in this country.
Yeah, so here in New York, for instance, where there's a shortage of natural gas because we don't have the pipelines to deliver it, you're saying that people could be seeing lower natural gas prices if they wanted to build a pipeline.
If there were pipelines, but as we've seen with Keystone, which is on and off and on and off, it seems like with every...
Come on, trying to run a show here. High quality production. What the hell? Man, can't get those pirated Fox News.
And that also happens to be a task with transmission lines for some of the green energy that we're talking about. When it comes to wind or solar, a lot of people don't want these power structures in their backyard. So while the United States is sitting on a lot of energy on private land, not on federal land, we've been slow to build the infrastructure that's necessary to keep those prices down.
John Hilsenrath. John, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.
Okay, thanks, guys. All right, let's get back to Alex Kashuta here, speaking with Reactionary Athenian stranger. He's a professor of the classics.
Because if all lives are equal, right? If any possible life that one could live is equal, then there's no such thing as the good life, right? What is it? They would say, well, what is the good, right? And this is the question that philosophy, classical philosophy, seeks to help people provide answers for, or at least help them to better articulate the questions that are worth asking, and then spend your life pursuing them, right? You would never think, for instance, that mere pleasure is the good life, right? The life of just someone who lives for hedonistic reasons, right? Everything is just a kind of a pleasure calculus or something like that. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I feel like people underestimate how much hedonism is essentially slavery to the senses. It's an extremely dependent life, and especially now with all these very sophisticated forms of dopamine management, it is literal slavery. And alcoholics know this because it's kind of a more traditional drug, but there are many other types of alcohol-like things out there. Like know someone kind of in my larger circle who's addicted to slot machines, and they're unable to work properly. They have to be at the slots, at noon every day. They're mishandling their family, they're mishandling their business. That's it. That's the thing. They haven't been able to quit for years, and it's all going downhill from here. It's terrible. And this is kind of slots are nothing new, but there's a certain things have evolved to a point where even the slots are essentially kind of video gamified, and they're quite more sophisticated than they used to be, and obviously more addictive because that's the name of the game. That's the business. So it's really scary.
Yeah, that's why I like using that word intoxication, because it can refer to anything that has to do with kind of overwhelming the pleasures or something like that. I saw this kid blow up at a grocery store on his own mom one time, and in front of everyone. He had no shame. I mean, this was a high school kid, for God's sake. There's no way he was younger than 15 or 16, and it was all because he wanted Hot Pockets. Like, she had gotten him she put a frozen pizza in the grocery cart, and he just exploded in front of everyone because he demanded Hot Pockets. And again, that goes back to that Thucydides reference I made, where he says the word that Thucydides uses is eros, an erotic madness swooped down over the entirety of the Athenians, and just sort of, they were all intoxicated with this longing for something that, if cooler heads would prevail, they wouldn't have chosen. And we see this intoxication with all of these various pleasures and hedonism, right? That's really what's at the root of all this sexual deviancy that we're seeing. They've even got it's almost like you want to, I personally wonder how much longer RuPaul will be alive. It seems like that guy has been around forever. He's been plaguing society forever. Now he's got his drag queen show there. Trudeau was on it, I think, and Pelosi was on it. Like, everyone has to go on this insane, stupid drag queen show because they want to show that they're tolerant of trannies and stuff.
Receive their blessings from Saint Paul.
Yeah, exactly. And really, that's just another madness, a kind of mad intoxication with these sorts of deviancies. I mean, that's why, in the same way that we know that alcoholics need help, and we used to know that these sexual deviants needed help, now we celebrate them as, not victims but champions, right? That Bruce Jenner guy gets a parade or something like that.
And from conservatives as well.
Exactly. I mean,
how many people really celebrate these deviants?
That's containment in action. I rarely do see something so, platonic ideal of containment. Caitlyn Jenner.
It was amazing. I actually saw him. They brought him on.
Okay, that's too depressing. All right, this is Coffefe talking again with Alex Kashuta.
Anybody else takes is wrong against us, and it shows it replicates constantly, because they have the same pattern, they have the same power seeking. But the point is, that's the one way of doing it is you're raising the flag and trying to get somebody to take up your cause. That's why you seek, and that's why you can conform to Americanism and to the GA or GNC is the more edgy phrasing of it, which I'm not going to say what that stands for on this Very Nice Family podcast. You're welcome. But that sort of ties in. And then the second way is that just by agreeing with the progressive ideology, you have the most powerful thing in the world, which is coordination. And coordination is the most powerful thing in the world, the most powerful thing there is. Weapons are nice. Weapons don't do a thing unless everybody agrees to fight.
Yeah, and
weapons lose to coordination. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just the interesting part of it, and why a lot of people don't seem to see it. I mean, it's just because it is invisible. It really kind of sinks into the background. Like, if I confront someone with progressive views that have absorbed them through the internet here, they really don't see it. They don't even see them as their views. They really just see them as the basic operating system of the world. This is absolute common sense. It's all.
Don't we all think that our hero system is objectively true and is the basic operating system of not just the world, the universe? So I don't think progressives are any different than Orthodox Jews, believing Christians, hardcore libertarians, and the like.
Also have this shine of expertise. It really disappears in the back. That's why it's even harder to challenge. It's not like you can just sit down and we're gonna debate these ideas in the marketplace. I really think the marketplace of ideas might work within, I don't know, maybe some very specific autistic academic subdisciplines, but in things that are considered the water you swim in, you can't even get an angle. Like, your lever will not. There is no hooking point for you to start tearing down these ideas. Like, people will have to go through some sort of dark night of the soul. In a way, that's kind of what I went through. I had to kind of see things in reality, be autistic enough to go against my kernel of agreeableness to actually say, okay, this is fucked up. So I'm gonna see what's going on with this stuff. So yeah, it really is a very hard thing to do. Like, the deprogramming of the normies is I feel like a doomed plan.
Oh, it's doomed. It's doomed. I mean, you can't deprogram all the normies, but the normies are.
I don't know. Just empirically, it seems most people get deprogrammed and red pilled. They go on to make a bigger mess of things than before they took the red pill. Not sure why that is. It shouldn't work out that way.
We're sensible. Can we put it? Let's put a pin. If you remind me, we can circle back on the marketplace of ideas, because I don't know if you've seen my posting on that. I've actually posted pretty I have a relatively developed idea about that. But you touched on something else. But you touched on something else that is exactly in my notes that I prepared for that I decided things I kind of wanted to talk about, and it's that the progressives see their worldview as not a worldview. They see it as just the way the world is, and
yeah, doesn't everyone? But everyone sees the world through their hero system. Orthodox Jews don't think, oh, this is my hero system, and believing Christians don't think this is my hero system, and believing libertarians don't think this is my hero system. We all think that our hero system is objectively true.
Extension of that is something I'll just call, like, I'll temporarily call it the progressive passive voice. The progressive in a conflict never takes an action. Things happen that meet.
Okay, but I think that's also true for conservatives, right? We all have a particular in-group, I hope, and we all have a worldview, a hero system, and if people with our hero system act badly, it's because all these outside forces have essentially forced them to do so.
And then he takes the action of shooting people who were not taking actions in charging at him with guns and trying to kill him.
Talking about Kyle Rittenhouse.
That was just something that happened. They charged at him with guns, and that wasn't a thing that they chose to do. That was just something they had to do that. How could it not happen? Kyle Rittenhouse's existence was a provocation to these people. So it's every bit of this in the macro and in the micro reflects the fact that the progressives have a framing where everyone on the progressive side is passive and everyone against the progressives is active, right? So, okay.
Yeah, no, I mean,
pause here for reaction.
No, I agree, and I think it's obviously a convenient framing, but I think it's also downstream from the fact that the way they see criminals, criminality, the way they see minorities as well. Like it doesn't paint a very pretty picture. This complete passivity. Just I mean, it really is essentially the final model there is kind of a Skinner box type thing where these people are animals. And the elements around them, the wind is blowing, so of course the dog will bite. That's it's not very flattering if you really consider it. But yeah, I mean that's that makes a lot of sense.
But they're not even consistent on that. If you want to be that charitable to them, which I'm not always in the mood to be, but if you want to be that charitable to them, they're not even consistent with that, because it's like SBF, Sam Baker-Fried's mother, I believe, or his aunt has a piece, and not in my notes, so I might get some details wrong. His aunt had a piece about, Steve Saylor wrote about it on the UN's review, and his aunt had a piece about how criminals, things that they do aren't their fault, and so therefore we should.
Yeah, a lot of people believe that free will is an illusion, right? And this was Sam Bankman-Fried's mother. Now, whether or not they're philosophically correct, we have to live and hold people accountable as though they have free will. There's just no other way to construct a life and construct a community.
What do you do with a man who can't live in society without constantly attacking people? Well, the traditional choice among every civilization that has ever existed in all of human history is you execute him and you put his head on a spike outside the city walls to warn people that that's not acceptable behavior.
Of the point that we've rushed. I mean, this, you have a forest with a lot of dead wood. I mean, I'm really, forcing some metaphors into this, but it's just, it cannot thrive. It cannot go anywhere. If your only criterion of success for your civilization is the maximization of any wood in your forest, that's going to turn into a wasteland. And yeah, I mean, take from that whatever you will. But the fact that there are no limiting conditions on our civilization in that way is insane. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay, I think I need to pay closer attention to the wildcard contest. We had Buffalo just scraping by Miami, shockingly close, 34-31. And right now, it looks like the New York Giants are up on the Minnesota Vikings. It is currently 10:58 a.m., 10:59 a.m., January 16th, 2023, here in Sydney. Maybe I'll just go on for a few more minutes.
You have no civilization. You have no way to enforce decivilizational processes.
Well, you know what? This is a perfect transition to the next thing. Is okay. So no one on their side is thinking about civilization. Everyone on their side is thinking about. Okay, so wait, I paused. Okay, so there are three classical forms of government and of governance of everything that Aristotle talks about. You can have a monarchical type government. You can have an oligarchical type government where it's governed by a few people, or you can have a democratic style where you vote on things to do, right? And in an oligarchic type government, it almost immediately breaks down in a very specific way. And the very specific way that it breaks down is no one in an oligarchical governance style has any incentive to worry about the actual whole of the system itself. No one worries about, hey, what exactly are we doing with our civilization? for the 800 people that were on the Zoom call, the post-election Zoom call, no one worries about what's going on with their civilization. Everyone on that call is, how do I make sure I'm one of the 800 people who get invited to the Zoom thing? So the result is the progressive system creates a self-reinforcing loop, and no one inside the thing.
Don't all strong in-group communities create self-reinforcing loops? It's certainly that way in Orthodox Judaism, certainly that way in Christianity, Islam. I'm sure it's that way when you grow up in Japan.
Can move the progressive machine in any way, shape, or form, because the name of someone who tries to move the progressive machine towards sanity is called a conservative, because he abandons progressivism, and conservatives are totally ineffectual because they're like, I want progressivism up to the point where it got uncomfortable for me. So no one can move progressivism towards sanity. So we have a civilization dedicated, in your analogy, to populating the woods with dead wood, because the total biomass gets counted and gets power to the person who puts the most wood in the forest, right? So all the individual people are competing with the others, and somebody who stops and says, no, this is a bad idea, we should stop loading this forest down with dead wood, doesn't get them to stop, but he just gets to lose his position to the other people who want to put more and more dead wood in there. So we're on this course towards destruction, and there's no way of avoiding it, and there's no one within the system that can act against it. And the idea of, and again, I'll pitch the NRX idea of monarchy, is basically that a king who is in charge of the system as a whole has an incentive to look over the value of the system as a whole, because of the system as a whole.
So I think it's way too simple to decide, oh, we're just in a representative democracy, or we're just in an oligarchy, or we're just in a dictatorship. All right, we're in all of those, and we have socialist elements. All right, we have capitalist elements. The world's a complicated place. Okay, I'm gonna say goodbye for now. Talk to you later. Bye bye.